Darkness is not an affirmative force. It simply reoccupies the space vacated by the light.
This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
It should be uncomfortable for a believer to live as a hypocrite.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media and the philosophies of this world.
God has called you and me to be his ambassadors, even in this dark moment. Let's not miss our moment.
And now, the Hamilton Corner.
Well, good day, patriots and pilgrims. Alex McFarland here on the American Family Radio Network, sitting in for attorney, pastor, journalist Abe Hamilton. Very honored to be here, and I want to get right to my first guest. In the interest of time, not a lot of preliminaries here. Very privileged once again to visit with Yale Law School graduate Reggie Littlejohn, and she has for years been an attorney. She's an expert voice on global issues, and I want to talk to her about the WHO, the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty. You've seen her in national media. She is a voice of truth and reason, and I'm very thankful for her and honored to have her with us here on the Hamilton Corny. Ms. Littlejohn, thank you so much for being with us today, but even more importantly, thank you for the work you do.
Oh, you're most welcome. Thanks for the opportunity, and you can just call me Reggie.
Well, thank you. And for those that may be unaware, what is your website, and where can people read your writing and follow the work you do?
Well, the most important website for these purposes is Anti-Globalist.net. That's one word, Anti-Globalist.net. I'm the founder and president of Anti-Globalist International. Mm-hmm.
Hey, I want to talk about the recent activity of the World Health Organization. And, I rejoice when President Trump, candidate Trump, and now President Trump has repeatedly talked about, we need to divest ourselves from involvement with the World Health Organization. But even prior to this, let's talk about a phrase that needs to be understood, the Great Reset, and resisting the Great Reset. Tell us what that phrase implies. What is the Great Reset?
Well, people think that the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, but there are actually books that have been written about it. And what it is it's an idea coming out of the World Economic Forum, I think mostly, that what we need is a fourth industrial revolution that is going to basically be based around robotics and AI, and it's going to completely reform society. And I think it's a nightmare. And I would ask people to read my manifesto on the antiglobalist.net, because I really take apart that idea as being a recipe for the digital gulag and a way to enslave all of us.
And the world being really a global police state.
Absolutely. Right. So the way that this fit in with the World Health Organization is that today, the World Health Organization, just today, passed the new pandemic treaty. Mm-hmm. And this fits in with the Great Reset. There's many parts to this Great Reset, but part of it is to establish surveillance. So one of the things that the pandemic treaty requires is the One Health approach, which sounds kind of innocuous, like human health is connected to animal health, is connected to plant health, is connected to the environment. But this is a way for the World Health Organization to bring under its purview the ability to monitor, surveil, and ultimately control every aspect of life on Earth. So there's a surveillance element of the Great Reset. Then you have the censorship element. And this new pandemic treaty recognizes the need to prevent misinformation and disinformation. Mm-hmm. So that's not even censorship. I mean, censorship is something you do afterwards. You say something they don't like, and then they make sure that it's taken down off of social media. This is preventing you from saying it to begin with. So right. I don't know how that is to be done. But I will just say one thing, which is that the original Director General of the World Health Organization, his name is Brock Chisholm, he has a famous quote. His quote is, To establish world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their loyalty to their families, their countries, and their faith. So that's a paraphrase, but that's basically what he said. He's the first Director General of the World Health Organization, and I would suggest to you that the World Health Organization from the beginning has been a globalist organization.
How powerful is the World Health Organization right now?
Well, see, it depends on how you define power. There's hard power and soft power. In terms of hard power, they don't really have an enforcement mechanism, although this new pandemic treaty does come in with it, something they actually call the mechanism, which is supposed to keep people accountable, keep countries accountable. But where their real power is that they give sort of cover to the medical establishment. So if the World Health Organization says, these vaccines are safe and effective, and we recommend that everybody have one, then if a country implements that, even if it ends up being a disaster, they can just say, well, we were just following the recommendations of the World Health Organization. So that in a administration in the United States, for example, like the Biden administration, they just blindly followed everything the World Health Organization said, which gave the World Health Organization tremendous power. Whereas in an administration like the Trump administration, he said, I don't trust these guys, and we're withdrawing from the World Health Organization. So they have less power, but no power, but they still have power, and we can get into that because it's important.
Has the USA fully extricated itself from the clutches of the World Health Organization, or are they still an influence here, and if so, to what degree and where?
Okay, so we are in uncharted territories. Trump stated on the first day in office, within hours of his inauguration, that he was withdrawing us from the World Health Organization. According to an addendum that we have with the WHO, it takes us a year to get out, and we have to have all of our fees paid. So what do you do during that year? Some people would say, well, we're still members. We could go and we could, negotiate and do whatever we want. Trump has taken the position that we're out, and he's not negotiating, and he's not signing any agreements, and his position is that we're out. So what can they do about that? Nothing. There's nothing they can do about it that I am aware of. But I want to mention one more thing that can impact the United States, even though we have withdrawn or are in the process of withdrawing from the World Health Organization. This new pandemic treaty establishes something called the Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, the PABS system, which is just a fancy way of saying that what they're doing is that whenever a country finds a pathogen, that a pathogen with pandemic potential, like in other words, a pathogen that could cause a pandemic, they are required to send it to the World Health Organization, and then the World Health Organization will send it to all kinds of labs all over the world, presumably so they can come up with vaccines. All right? What could possibly go wrong? I mean, so what they're doing is, to the extent that COVID-19 was a lab leak, they are greatly increasing the chances of lab leaks. They're greatly increasing the chances of inadvertent pandemics and even purposeful pandemics, because if the pathogen finds its way into the hands of a bad actor, they could just launch a bioterrorist attack.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, a toxin or a pathogen not circulated around, it should be quarantined, shouldn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. It should be quarantined. It should not be circulated. So this PAB system circulates it. And what that is probably going to do is it's going to put the world into just a series of pandemics, which the United States is not going to be immune to. I mean, we're not going to be answerable to the World Health Organization. We're going to be running our own healthcare, thank God. But we're not going to be immune from the pandemics themselves. So, and then not only that, but for the countries that are so inclined, having these pandemics can be used as a pretext for locking people down and depriving them of their constitutional rights. That won't happen in the United States under Trump. But if we get another president, that is inclined towards that, they can use this to those ends. And that brings me to another point, that President Trump withdrew us by executive order, which is all he can do. that he's done what he can do. But what that does is it leaves us open to, if another president comes in that actually likes the World Health Organization and actually wants to see the Great Reset happen, they could just put us right back in, and there's nothing to stop it. So we need to have legislation, not just an executive order, legislation to prevent the next president from just doing that with a stroke of a pen. And I would point people to Sovereignty Coalition, where we have where you can take action to send an email to your legislators saying we need legislation to keep us out of the World Health Organization.
I remember during the draconian quarantines and during the pandemic, I remember Australia, and you can speak to this if you choose. I mean, it became the most oppressive police state. We actually had emails and correspondence from listeners in Australia that were telling us just these almost unbelievable stories of oppression and repercussion and jail time for, even like going out in their yard without a mask. The pandemic lockdowns were just unbelievably oppressive. And even here in America, in numerous states, police chiefs and mayors and even like city managers, unelected city managers, were taking it on themselves to subordinate people's constitutional rights. And I guess my question, Reggie, would be, are there, legal voices like yourself and others that are saying, look, we've got to preemptively act so that regardless of what the world might do, America will never get in this place again. Our constitutional rights, and as Christians, and I'm a pastor, the right to assemble, the right to worship, our God-given, constitutionally protected rights will never again be subordinated to medicine that's been politicized.
Well, we are definitely on the right path. It was a tremendous victory when President Trump withdrew us from the World Health Organization. So that's like a huge leap forward in that direction. The second thing would be to make it permanent with legislation. And then the third thing would be, actually, I would think that you as a pastor, that the church needs to rise up and say, we have the right to assemble, we have the right to worship, etc. I think that there is a role for the church to play, and for praying believers, just to pray that this would never happen again, because the church just sort of rolled over too easily last time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There were courageous ministers like John MacArthur out in California who. He was willing to face legal threats, millions and millions of dollars in fees, but he did what a good spiritual leader is to do. He courageously led his flock. But there were lots, another subject for another day, a lot of churches and far too many of my fellow clergy that were just cowards and rolled over and played dead. But let's talk about in the legal and judicial fields. Did you know many fellow attorneys and constitutional scholars that were just broken over how the pandemic just really eviscerated the power of the Constitution?
Well, broken is the word. There was one named Dr. Francis Boyle, who was an eminent international attorney who was absolutely heartbroken and very vocal about the way that our constitutional rights were being taken away. And alas, unfortunately, he died. He died a few months ago.
Wow.
So I don't know, I'm not saying that he died of a broken heart. I'm not saying that. I really don't understand why he died. I heard that he died, and I never found out what the circumstances were. But he was a very wonderful voice. And then this time last year, I flew to Geneva when the international health regulation amendments were being voted on, and there was a group of international lawyers that got up and spoke. So there were 10 of us from 9 different countries.
Forgive me, hold that thought. I'm so sorry. We've got a brief break. Alex McFarland here, along with attorney, constitutional scholar Reggie Littlejohn. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about how, as citizens and professionals, we can stand together for our constitutional rights in the face of politicized medicine. Be afraid, but stay tuned.
A Discipleship Minute with Joseph Parker.
The work of being a parent is an awesome responsibility. It's a great responsibility. It's a privilege. It's a joy. Our job is to do all we can to help our children come to know Christ, and then to passionately be involved in the work of discipling them, helping them to grow up in their faith, to become mature, strong, vibrant, young men and women who love Jesus and live for Jesus every single day. Lord, with every passing day and more, help us all to grow in our understanding of how critical it is that we do our job, that we carry out what you've called us to do. But help us to know, Lord, that your word is a wonderful tool, a wonderful guidebook in helping us to be faithful disciples and faithful disciple makers as well. Use us in a wonderful way to help them to come to know Christ, and then use us and work through us to help our children to come to fall in love with you and with your word. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.
Some years ago, I experienced an unusual time of brokenness at a gathering of Christian leaders. They began confessing their sins to God, and many publicly confessed their sins to the whole group. At first, when people began to mourn and grieve over their sins, the atmosphere was kind of heavy. But over the next couple of days, people began to sing. And it wasn't because a worship leader said it was time to sing. It was just out of gratitude and love for Jesus. The words of Isaiah 61 were true in those days. Once people were truly broken, God gave them gladness instead of mourning. He gave them a garment of praise instead of a spirit of despair. The music that poured out of those freshly cleansed hearts is some of the most beautiful I've ever heard. If you truly want to worship God, you don't have to have a praise team or fancy equipment, but you do need a broken, repentant heart. With Seeking Him, I'm Nancy DeMoss Wagamuth.
Let's see, if something costs less, a lot less, but people are actually happier with it, that sounds like something to look into, and that's MediShare. Maybe you've heard joining MediShare can save you or your family up to $500 a month, and that's huge, but it's also true. People are just happier with it. They love being part of something that reflects and promotes their values and what they believe in. MediShare works, too. It's been around for 30 years now, and members have shared more than $7 billion of each other's bills. People love having telehealth and a huge nationwide PPO network, so yeah, really, you can save a ton and like it better. Imagine being happy with how you're taking care of your health care, whether you're self-employed or part of the gig economy, or you just want a plan that you're happy with. Here you go. You can call right now and get a price within 2 minutes, a very, very smart use of 2 minutes. Here's the number you need. It's 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
Shining light into the darkness. This is the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio.
Alex McFarland back with our guest, attorney Reggie Littlejohn. I want to refer you to a website, Anti-Globalist.net. Spelled just like it sounds, Anti-Globalist International, resisting the Great Reset. At the forefront of educating and motivating people is attorney Reggie Littlejohn. Hey, it's a privilege to have you on, Reggie, and I just want to thank you very much. Before the break, you were talking about some leaders. I guess, and we've only got you for a few short minutes, as you know, professionals like yourself, attorneys, educators, clergy, but citizens, what can we do as Americans to, unify, stand strong for American sovereignty, our own personal rights, and not be the victims of a reset, an agenda, a plandemic? What do you recommend that we do to guard our freedoms and our future?
Well, like you said, I would go to antiglobalist.net and sign the manifesto, because if you do that, that's going to put your name on my newsletter list. And when things come up to take action about, I will alert you. One of the things that people can do is do one of our action items, which is to send an email or call your senators and your congressional representatives and say, we need to make this withdrawal from the World Health Organization permanent through legislation. That is key. And one of the other key things is very simply that our representatives, whether they are national representatives or state or local, they have so many people trying to demand their time, and so they prioritize those issues that they hear from their constituents about. And they might not even know a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of ignorance everywhere in our society about these things, including in our own legislatures. So I would really urge people to take action by calling their legislators and telling them, we need to make this permanent through legislation. And there are many, many other actions that are happening along the way that you will be alerted to if you just sign the manifesto.
Reggie, let me ask you this, like the World Health Organization, the UN, to what degree are they in league with the Chinese Communist Party?
To a very great extent. I mean, the Chinese Communist Party has absolutely outsized influence at the World Health Organization, certainly, and also at the United Nations. And we saw that very clearly in the way that the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General, just mouthed the lies of the Chinese Communist Party. They said there was no human-to-human transmission. So that's the word that went out from the World Health Organization. They said this was not a lab leak; it came from a bat or a pangolin. And the World Health Organization just put that message out. They said there's no need to restrict travel from China. Meanwhile, they were restricting travel within China, all right, because they knew it was.
Oh, yes.
And the World Health Organization just mouthed that. So what did that do? It gave the opportunity, if the whole world is believing that there's no human-to-human transmission and there's no need to restrict travel from China, what it does is it gives the Chinese Communist Party the ability to infect the entire world with the virus. Now, I'm not saying it was deliberate, but if it wasn't deliberate, I mean, if they wanted to do it deliberately, I don't know what they would have done differently. Okay?
Wow. I know we're out of time, and I want to respect your time because you're due to speak at another function here just like 1 minute ago. So I'm going to have to let you go, but I want to thank you for the work you're doing. You're courageous, you're cutting edge, and we sincerely appreciate having you on and benefiting from your wisdom.
Thank you so very much for having me.
We'll look forward to our next conversation. The website again, Anti-Globalist.net, attorney, Yale graduate Reggie Littlejohn. Well, this is Alex McFarland here, and we're going to continue in just a moment and segue and talk a little bit about the arts in just a moment. We'll have a guest on, Greg Rabidoux, who is a filmmaker, an award-winning filmmaker, and we're going to talk a little bit not only about the arts and using film and stage and books to convey truth, but a surprising, you may not be aware, some of the degree to which China is involved in Hollywood. You know, when I worked for Dr. James Dobson, I wrote for Plugged In Magazine, and Plugged In Magazine is focused on the family's website. It was a print magazine for many, many years, but it's a website now, and it's just fantastic. Really, we would do evaluations of film and television and even video games from a biblical worldview perspective to try to help parents make God-honoring entertainment choices for their families. And, 21 years ago, when I was working for James Dobson, writing for Focus on the Family, I mean, a lot of what we looked out for were moral elements. I mean, films might have profanity or nudity or gratuitous sexual scenes that, parents, unsuspectingly, their children might go see a movie and see something that was very, very inappropriate. So we would write movie reviews. But let me say more and more, parents need to be aware of the worldview elements in the media that we imbibe. Because worldview is present. I mean, it's impossible for the art not to reflect the worldview of the artist. So let's talk about this because, regarding worldview, 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4 speaks of the god of this world, that's Satan, who blinds the mind of unbelievers to keep them from seeing the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. See, Satan wants to keep people in the dark and prevent them from believing. And for 249 years of American history. You see, our nation is coming up on its 250th birthday in 2026. But for 249 years, our nation, the absolute DNA of America, and this is where our constitutional liberties come from. And really, the free, safe, stable, prosperous society, sustainable society that we've enjoyed, it's not been an accident. It's been due to our biblical foundations. But these things have been at risk for a lot of decades. You know this. We've talked about it. And it all comes down to worldview. So I want to talk about this for a little bit. Many times I've mentioned the great writer James Sire, S-I-R-E. He passed away about 5 years ago. I strongly recommend his books. He's written on apologetics. But James Sire, a number of years ago, really kind of got the ball rolling to discuss worldview. And he wrote a book called The Universe Next Door. And the premise of that book is that your next door neighbor just might be, living 25 feet away, but it's a whole nother universe. Let's say your home is Christian and you say the blessing before a meal. Well, 20 feet away is the next door neighbor, and maybe they're an atheist or a Wiccan or whatever. It's an entirely different universe next door. Now, here's how Sire defines worldview. A set of assumptions which you hold about the basic makeup of the world. Now, the fine print, your worldview, which is how you view reality. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What is morally right, morally wrong? Okay. Your worldview, says James Sire, is a set of assumptions which may be true, might be partially true, might be entirely false, which you hold consistently or inconsistently, consciously or subconsciously, about the basic makeup of the world. Now, for so many centuries of the Western world, and certainly 2.5 centuries of American life, all right, first of all, the universe was thought to be rational and orderly. Truth is absolute. The truth is very exclusive in that some things are morally right, some things are morally wrong. And the definition of truth, if you've listened to AFR much, you've heard me say it. You and I, if you're not just a Christian, but just a rational adult, you have what is called a correspondence view of truth. In other words, truth is that which corresponds to reality. In other words, it's the way things really are. But we're more and more living in a time of what we call relativism. Maybe you've heard the term postmodernism, and we're really postmodernism. Postmodernism actually is a term that's been around since the 1920s, 75 years into a Darwinian evolutionary world of secularism, a world that doesn't assume God exists, but assumes God doesn't exist. Postmodernism has been around 100 years. But here's some of the core assumptions. For one thing, that truth is relative. It's not that you discover truth, it's that we all make our own truth. And not exclusivism, that some things are right, some things are wrong, but pluralism is that all things are true and all things are appropriate and all things are right. In other words, it's true for you. The only thing is, though, look, in a world of limitless opinions, we might all be wrong, but we can't all be right. For example, and then I'm going to segue to our next guest. But look, Jesus Christ claimed to be the one and only Son of God, and he rose from the dead. I've often asked college audiences, I'll say, Christ claimed to be the Savior, the Son of God. Was he right or was he wrong? Because people might say, well, I reject Jesus, or I don't believe he was the Son of God. Well, fair enough. But he has a resume that eclipses hours. He walked on water and rose from the dead. And so there is a way we can measure truth claims. Now, it's been said we're all entitled to our own opinion, but we're not entitled to our own personal facts, because facts trump opinion. Truth trumps bias. Part of the reason that our world is really struggling, and certainly the arts are not what they once were, it's because we have elevated personal preference, personal bias, personal opinion, subjective, relative preference to that of absolute truth. We've denied absolutes, but set our own selves up as the absolute arbiter and measurement. In other words, it's a world of chaos. Well, breathing some reason and rationality into this world of chaos is filmmaker, award-winning filmmaker, scriptwriter, author, co-founder of Valmar Films and Valmar Productions, director, scriptwriter, Greg Rabidoux, and he is with us now. And there's a lot I want to ask him, but partially about the presence of China in Hollywood. But first of all, Greg, give me the correct pronunciation of your last name, sir.
Oh, sure. So it's Greg Rabidoux. You were real close.
Rabidoux.
Closer than most.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your patience with me and your willingness to be on the program. And is that French, by the way?
Yeah, I think part of it is French, and I'm kind of a mix. I think part of it's French. I think there's a little bit Italian there and some Spanish. So,
sure.
But I'm mostly just American.
Well, amen. Amen. I was really interested to have a conversation with you. I wrote for Plugged In Magazine, had the privilege of interviewing a lot of people that create art. And I wanted to get to know you because art has power, doesn't it? If you would speak to the presence of worldview in art and really how art has more of an influence on thought and actions, I think, than most people passively realize.
Yeah, it's a great point. And historically, we've seen that art in many different shapes and forms and platforms can have a very powerful, almost a sublime influence on how people think, on how they act, what they wear, where they want to go, what they want to do, their feelings on current events, for example, what's trendy, what's not. And then on the flip side, which I think you were talking a little bit about before, which is when you have leadership, for example, historically, like in China, for example, Mao, who is famous for saying that art for art's sake does not exist. Art can only and must only serve the glory of the revolution, of the communist revolution. So they targeted art and especially film early on for its power to influence people and then reinforce whatever truth, you were talking about that, making some wonderful points, whatever truth that they felt they wanted to share and spread across the world. And in their case, it was their revolution and the power of communist China. And they very early on coveted the power of art, film, and Hollywood and its ability to influence and tell the story, in that case, of the U.S. and America around the world. So very early on, they understood it. They got it on very different levels, what art can do.
Well, yeah, and Greg, it's funny. Just last night, and I had no idea 24 hours ago that I was going to be able to have this conversation with you, but I was reading, some of the classic films that we cherish and people look at for decades, whether it be Citizen Kane or It's a Wonderful Life or Gone with the Wind or Wizard of Oz, had fairly low budgets, and yet they've lasted for decades, whereas more recently, some of the woke kind of propaganda pieces of art, hundreds of millions of dollars, and that they aren't loved at all. There's a difference between art from the heart and propaganda that's trying to control us. Hey, Greg, we've got a break. Can you hang on and we'll continue the conversation?
Absolutely.
And what's your website, sir?
GregTheFilmmaker.com. GregTheFilmmaker, 2 N's, 2Ms.com.
All right, stay tuned, folks. Greg, the filmmaker, Alex McFarland, and more after this.
Some would say truth is relative, and to the world, that's right. What the world considers to be truth fluctuates depending on the narrative they're trying to promote. Of course, we know truth is found in Scripture, and it never changes. The documentary, The God Who Speaks, proves the Bible's reliability as the source of real truth and reinforces our belief in it as our firm foundation. Watch it anytime at stream.afa.net. That's stream.afa.net. We see and hear about the big public issues happening in our nation's capital, but what about the things that happen behind the scenes? That information can give us the whole story and help shape our opinions. That's why you need to listen to Washington Watch Weekend with Tony Perkins. He and his guests will give you all parts of the Washington news from a conservative Christian perspective. Catch Washington Watch Weekend Saturdays at 5:05 a.m. and 6 p.m. Central, and Sunday mornings at 3 Central on AFR.
Worldliness. This is David Wheaton, host of The Christian Worldview. What hinders the pursuit of holiness, defined as Christ-likeness, is the opposite, worldliness. Worldliness is defined in Scripture as the sinful lusts and pride which the world around us relentlessly promotes. The fallen world led by Satan presents endless ways to draw us off the path of holiness and down the dead end of worldliness. Let's remember that the reward of doing God's will is far better than pursuing the paltry and temporal satisfactions of the world. The Bible says, "The world is passing away, and also its lusts, but the one who does the will of God lives forever." Hear our most recent program on worldliness at thechristianworldview.org, and then join us this weekend for another topic that will sharpen your worldview.
Listen to The Christian Worldview with David Wheaton, Saturday mornings at 8 Central on American Family Radio.
In the darkest corners of the world, hunger, abuse, lack of clean water, and shelter are everyday realities. Tomorrow Clubs is a ministry motivated by the Great Commission to bring God's love and the hope of the gospel to these forsaken places. Here's an update from a team leader.
One of the greatest impacts Tomorrow Clubs have had is in raising a whole generation of Christ followers. More than 500,000 children have learned to follow Jesus in their Tomorrow Club, and tens of thousands have gone on to become leaders in their churches and communities. A great many of the leaders serving at Tomorrow Clubs today came to faith in a Tomorrow Club, and this new generation of Christ followers has brought revival to dying churches and transformation to communities.
Tomorrow Clubs provide Christ-centered discipleship for children and teens in underserved countries. To learn more about how you can partner with Tomorrow Clubs to reach the world for Christ, visit tomorrowclubs.org. That's tomorrowclubs.org. All gifts are tax deductible.
The American Family Association's mission is to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. Our goal is to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. AFA believes that all men and women, whether in private or public, should be free to exercise their faith without hindrance from the government.
Thank you for standing with the American Family Association.
The Hamilton Quarter podcast and one-minute commentaries are available at afr.net. Back to the Hamilton Quarter on American Family Radio.
Welcome back, folks. Alex McFarland here. Very honored to be sitting in for Abe Hamilton III. Hey, before we resume our conversation about worldview and the arts, I want to remind everybody about a couple of things. We've got our summer speaker series that we are doing. You know, I'm on the road traveling like every weekend all over America. We've got youth camps in Montana, New Jersey. But I'm doing a speaker series called Conversations That Matter. And we're doing this in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Now, Myrtle Beach, 17.5 million people a year from all 50 states visit. And there's a music and theater industry, kind of like Branson, Missouri. Well, we've rented theaters. We've brought in Dinesh D'Souza in early May, and then we've got Dr. Gary Chapman, who wrote The 5 Love Languages, Fox News, Lauren Green this fall. A lot of great speakers. And if you've never been to Myrtle Beach, it's awesome. I like it because it's like the restaurant capital of the country, in my opinion. But go to my website, alexmcfarland.com/conversations. Also, I'll be at the Cove, the Billy Graham Training Center, talking about worldview and why really it behooves all of us to know about worldview, and in my case specifically, the biblical worldview and the truth that is not only about personal salvation, but about really the foundation in the constitutional republic in which we live. So check out my tour schedule, all that we're doing. I value your prayers. I appreciate your interest. alexmcfarland.com. Well, Greg Rabidoux is, again, the website, Greg the Filmmaker, and the two M's together, FILMMAKER, GregTheFilmmaker.com. He's an award-winning director and writer, Stolen Babies of Spain, Letters to the Pope, author of The Insatiable Dragon and Hollywood Politicos Then and Now. Greg, first of all, thank you for being with us. And I'm interested, you have trained at NYU Film Department, and you've been an expert voice on politics and film. So there's a lot more than when we just go to the theater, we buy the ticket, we get the popcorn. There's more to the movie industry than maybe I think most of us think about. Agreed?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. A lot more to the industry, a lot more sort of what I would call the underbelly or the dark side of even creating art and creating film and getting it distributed. And it's changed so much now, as you know. It now it is so much about streaming and subscription and what platforms the films are going to be on. Many films are made, and there's never really an intention of ever even trying to get it to a theater for people to see. It's a lot more about purchasing it beforehand, having on which subscriptions are you talking, Netflix or Hulu, Roku, Tubi, Disney Plus. I mean, there's so many now. So in a way, it's good. You can get to more audiences. But in a way, I think your earlier point when you said you have these huge behemoths of, movies with $250 million, $500 million or more, and yet it bombs. And you go, well, why did that flop? Why didn't it make it? For example, why didn't this recent live action of Snow White make it? Well, if you create a soulless film, if you go out and you almost shoot yourself in the foot from a publicity standpoint because you badmouth the film, you badmouth, in that case, the classic, right? Rachel Zegler, the star of the new Snow White, was bad-mouthing the classic, which is truly a classic in so many ways of Disney, a true family film in many ways. Then you wonder why the families, which I think, as you also know, a lot of the audiences for things like the Disney are families, and they tend to be conservative. They tend to be much more Christian and conservative, and they don't want to see soulless films. They don't want to see films with woke agendas. They don't want to see a film that is almost lecturing you and telling you how you should think, how you should act. That's not the power of true film. The true film meets us where we are and tells stories that uplift us and inspire us to be better, to enjoy and be entertained, not to feel like we're being browbeaten after we paid the ticket or paid the subscription price on the streaming device.
Yeah. My wife and I, we'll go see movies, I don't know, half a dozen times in a calendar year. Probably 5-6 times in the year we go out to see a movie. And Greg, for several years I've noticed, the theater is empty. I'm talking like on a Friday night or something. And, we go see movies that catch our interest. And it's like the movie theaters are always like, my wife and I and maybe 3 other people, how are they going to make it with, 5, 6, 7 tickets in a vast theater of hundreds of empty seats?
Yeah, and it's a great point. And the bottom line, the short answer is they won't, if that's what they only rely on in terms of generating the revenue. The other interesting aspect, I don't think a lot of audiences realize this, is part of China's strategy to get so much influence in Hollywood in films and in other words, almost turned into a propaganda machine in part for themselves, is they've purchased outright almost all of our theaters in the U.S. So all your AMC theaters, all your Carhartt theaters, all of those theaters are owned by Chinese companies. And unlike the U.S., when you're a Chinese company, you're not a private company. You're still very much tethered to and really must follow the direction of the Chinese government. And they have national laws in place to make sure you do just that. So that's a real interesting twist there. And so in terms of some of these empty theaters, it speaks more about the power of all of the subscription and streaming and digital era that we're in, which is a move away from that shared collective human experience of going to a theater and everyone kind of sharing and watching a movie and having reactions and that energy at the same time. There's only a few movies that have packed the theaters and get that kind of a reaction. And so as a filmmaker, the types of films we make, documentaries, we're moving to more narrative features. We try to do also faith-based films that working on scripts there. We really want that kind of collective experience. It's kind of like going to a church, It's not the same if you're by yourself at home. Yes, you can speak to God, but there's something about that power and energy of that shared experience. So we're hoping to see a sort of a revitalization, but you got to have the kind of films that families and others want to go see, don't you? I mean, if you don't, they're going to rely on the flipping and on the TV screen or the digital subscription platforms.
So if you would, and by the way, regarding the theaters being owned by Chinese companies and those Chinese companies influenced by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, I had no idea. Talk about the presence of China in Hollywood. I mean, this is a topic that an hour ago I knew nothing about, so I want to hear it. I'm sure many listeners do too.
Well, sure. So years ago, again, right before the Chinese Revolution, the Chiang Kai-shek, Kuomintang, the nationalists who fought the communists, also believed in film, and they kind of invited and allowed Hollywood films in because they wanted to learn, especially about the storytelling and technology. After the Communist Revolution, Mao coveted the storytelling aspect. He covered the power and the propaganda, but they feared that they said that the films were too decadent or it was too much of an American influence. Well, you fast forward to like the last 25, 30 years or so, China targeted Hollywood once again, but this time they targeted through the World Trade Organization. So what they did is they got a sweetheart deal through then Vice President Joe Biden, who basically said, we're going to look the other way on all the violations you've had, essentially all the cheating you've done, all the broken promises you've done in the film industry in Hollywood, and we'll give you a clean slate on the condition you just allow more Hollywood films in China. And China said, sure, we'll do that. Well, since that point, let's say late 1990s, early 2000s, up to mid-2012, when that deal really went into effect, China has, again, broken promises. They've invested in Hollywood. They own certain divisions of some of the major studios. They own outright big studios like Legendary Entertainment is owned by a Chinese company. They own, like I said, virtually all of the major Hollywood actual movie theaters in the U.S. They have tremendous sway and influence over what scripts get made, and as importantly, what scripts don't get made. And if you think real quick, I mean, think of a Chinese villain. Think of a story that looks so negatively on China. You're going to be real hard-pressed to find it because they pretty much ensure it doesn't get made. So they accept big blockbuster films, a few, like especially Avengers and Captain America, because ironically, China has said they like some of the premises of Captain America, which talks about corruption in Washington, D.C., and that there's a rot in our government and in our values. So they embrace films like that in China. But when it comes the other way to, okay, can we send more films, or myself as an independent filmmaker, do we have access to China? And with almost no exceptions, the answer is no. So China's been very strategic. They've been very shrewd. They've invested lots of money. They've gotten power in a lot of the studios, and they call a lot of the shots of what happens right now. Now, there are options, and in my book, I argue one of the options is sitting right near China, and that's India. India has 1.4 billion people. It's a democracy. They are movie crazy in Hollywood, in India. Bollywood. They love movies. Bollywood, absolutely. And so I would love to see us do a lot more investing with India and build that bridge there. And I'd love to see a lot more pressure put on countries like China to truly open up and be accountable when they break rules and violate and break promises, because there just hasn't been that in place for the last 25, 30 years.
Now China's influence in Hollywood, that's your book, The Insatiable Dragon, right?
Yeah, The Insatiable Dragon, how China took control of Hollywood, a cautionary tale that talks obviously a lot more in depth than we have time now, but it starts from the early days of how they put in this plan, some of the people and organizations that kind of helped them, knowingly or unknowingly, get those doors open and get that influence, and then what it looks like today with so much influence. And, take Mission Impossible, for example. I mean, in the Mission Impossible series, they made it clear they didn't want any reference to Taiwan. They made it clear that the Tom Cruise character Maverick would not have certain patches on his jacket that he had about Asia or Taiwan. They made it clear that if they want the money, which they did, certain things just wouldn't be in the film. They've done that with James Bond franchise, with Daniel Craig. They've done it with the Avengers. They've done it with a number of films, which then get re-edited and changed when it gets released in China. So if you and I were to go to a theater and watch it here and then go to China, there'd be parts we'd say, my goodness, either I was getting popcorn at that moment or I totally missed that, because it's almost different movies the way it's changed to fit what they want China to see, which is 99.9% or more negative towards the West and the U.S.
Isn't it ironic, Greg, that, people that are politically left, pride themselves on human rights and social justice and equity, and yet, Hollywood is in bed with the world's most persistent violator of human rights. Isn't that ironic?
It is a great point, and I wish that could be underscored so much more. I'll give you a very quick anecdote. When Disney was filming the live-action movie of Mulan, they were filming very close to the Guangdong province, where literally there are Uyghur detention camps and re-education camps, they call them. Essentially, they're beating them down and punishing them for their views and their religious views and their cultural views. And Disney was literally just 2 to 3 miles away shooting on location, and they basically agreed that they would not make that an issue. They wouldn't say anything. They wouldn't make sure there'd be nothing negative about it. And then, of course, when it got public, there was a backlash against Disney for essentially just looking the other way when it came to those because of the chance at profit. And maybe there was some justice or serendipity after that, but that live-action Mulan, another big-budget movie of over $200 million, flopped as well because
Greg,
families didn't think it was cute. They liked the animated better.
I beg your forgiveness. I'm so honored to make your acquaintance. The website is Greg the Filmmaker, spelled just like it sounds, Greg the Filmmaker. Worldview is present in the media that we imbibe. We're out of time. We'll continue later, but Alex McFarland here. Thanks for listening. Hey, folks, stay informed, stay bold, speak truth.